Hello, everybody. I'm so glad again to be able to have this touch base with you. And it's been, as usual, another week in South Africa where there are a lot that happens, not only in Parliament, but in society in general. And I think, let me start with the most pressing of the issues. Parliament spent quite a bit of time debating extortions or the crime of extortion. Now, in the release last week of the crime stats, they indicate the fact that we're seeing over 500 people being murdered every day. We're seeing an increase in crimes of gender-based violence. We're seeing the fact that actually conviction rates are below or are declining. They're below 20%. So effectively, what is happening in our country is that citizens are living in fear and criminals are walking around freely. Because criminals believe a few things which are borne out in evidence. They believe that they can get away with murder, which, when you look at conviction rates, that remains true. Citizens are also seeing that when they call the police, sometimes the police don't show up, or when the police do show up, they are the ones who are asking them for bribes. And when the crime has been reported, often what happens is that the docket goes missing. There is no proper actual conviction that happens at the end of that, which means that our prison doors become revolving doors. And more seriously than that, is that the crime of extortion is on the rise. At a basic level, there are people now having to pay protection fee just to get to work or run a business. In other instances, you are finding more and more people saying, if I want to open up a factory, I've got to employ certain people. And at a grand heist level, it's the construction mafia as expressed in places like KZN. What did disturb me, though, yesterday was that in the debate, it felt more and more like it was a brainstorming session. More promises of another talk shop, another space where we can still meet and discuss these issues. Now, I'm here to make it quite clear. If South Africa is going to become an attractive place for investment, and for businesses to thrive, and for citizens to live freely, we have to declare war on crime. All crime. Because the conditions are set up for extortion. If you feel like the ultimate crime is murder against citizens, you are going to be bound to be vulnerable to having to pay extortion or protection fee in certain instances. So I want to be clear. Here are a couple of things that I think we need to be doing. The first is that we need to have a reset on values. Values in society determine the behavior of citizens. They are the things that tell us that, we can't be going into a church to rob people. Those are the things that tell you that it is immoral and dangerous. When I hear stories of young people raping grannies, it is dehumanizing. But it starts with us saying, what is the value? What is the value of Ubuntu? What is the value in society that starts there, that says we value our humanity? The second thing is we've got to value ethics. We've got to produce a society upon which accountability is an espoused value. People know if you do the crime, you will do the time. But the difficulty in this country is that people are watching politicians and leaders get away with corruption. Get away with a sense that if you are politically connected, you can be able to say, well, you'll circumvent the law. And the net consequence of that is that in certain instances, you could end up back as a member of parliament. How does that happen? It communicates that, in fact, this country is consequence-free and you can get away with crime. We have to begin to say, let's create ethical leadership. Let's have our leaders be above reproach if we're going to vote for them. Let's ensure that ultimately that in institutions, state-owned enterprises, society in general, we are appointing leaders that are ethical. Because I don't want to see another day where I have to read a headline of a school child who decided to shoot the headmaster, whatever the case might be, because that tells you that society is broken. Our job and duty as citizens is to align on values. The second thing is we've got to ensure that we actually don't take an approach that says a bigger stick is going to solve crime. I was a bit disturbed when I heard the Minister of Police saying, well, the first thing to do is to go out and shoot and arrest or do both of those things. if the other fails. Whilst I think you need to take a tough stance on crime, but you need a different strategy. Crime fails because in many instances, the police don't have prioritization. We have to prioritize murder. You must know in this country, if you take a life of a South African, the full might of the law must come against you. Because then you can create conditions where citizens don't feel like they are fearful for their lives. And part of that is about capacitating police stations, making sure that they've got the best vehicles, ensuring that we devolve certain powers so that there's better intelligence on the ground and that people can know who the crooks are and go and arrest them. But also fill up the vacancies. We've got 8,000 vacancies for policemen in this country. Let's fill them up. Let's ensure that the 22,000 detectives are capacitated so that they can better. We increase that number so that they can fight the crime. Ultimately, we need more eyes in communities. And that's why a devolution strategy that partners with national strategy to ensure that when we can get more policemen, we can partner with Metro Police, and we can increase volunteer culture in the policing so that more and more of us are looking out for who the criminals are, can arrest them, and we can use private security companies to augment the police service so that we can be much more effective at fighting crime. Another workshop, another talk shop isn't going to help us. We can't keep doing more of the same. We need a direct change. And ultimately, the vision we hold is that ultimately I want to live in a country where my girls can walk around freely. And I was thinking about them actually when the minister was talking. I thought to myself, if we're seeing an increase in gender-based violence, I don't see an increase in funding for gender-based violence initiatives. And so I'm going back to the committee I chair, which is the Committee on Appropriations, to fight harder for more money to fight gender-based violence in this country. Because we can talk is cheap. But actually, when we adjudicate and we put budget and increase the amount of money we give to policing, digitize, adopt a very strong digital infrastructure so that we digitize dockets so that they don't go missing, and that more and more people use technology initiatives to fight where the crime is, technologies such as Crime Stopper or Shot Stopper, which listens out via radar where gunshots are coming from. We can use all of that technology so that we become more sophisticated in responding to crime. That is fundamental. All citizens need to feel safe. And, you know, when we look at this week, no one can deny the fact that a key contributing factor is that we've just got too many people living in poverty and unemployed and are vulnerable to being used for crime. I listened with great interest when I heard the latest GDP stats, which say that South Africa has grown by 0.4%. Now, 0.4% relative to a population that's growing at 2% every year tells you that how at that growth rate, you cannot keep up with employment. You can't keep up with making sure that more and more people are finding work. In truth, we need to be growing at between 3 to 5% if we're going to begin to make a dent on unemployment. And that seems a distant way away. And so part of the initiatives that we've got to do is the first one, which I've got to say, I welcome the idea of the fact that we've kept the lights on. Whilst we celebrate it, it should be common cause that electricity is available in this country. So we've got to improve on that. But the reality of it is that as the economy begins to grow even more, it's going to demand more power. So we can't sit on our laurels and hope that we're going to just keep status quo. We've got to be increasing capacity so that as we grow, we can keep the lights on. But it's not only just that infrastructural built on energy, it's also on basic services like water. It's about ensuring that actually businesses can run, that they can be safe. That's on one component of building bulk infrastructure. But the second issue is the fact that we've got to fix institutions like Transnet and PRASA. The National Logistics Crisis Committee means that more and more goods have to be moving into the country, and we've got to see a genuine improvement on that score. It is absolutely crucial that goods can come in and out of this country, and fixing of Transnet and PRASA are fundamental. Because when you do that, you are going to ensure that more and more people can get to work and goods can get in and out of this country easier. This is fundamental. I'm not I don't agree with the view that says that we need one holding company to hold all state-owned enterprises. I think the best way to do it, to enhance accountability, is to allow each entity to report to its line function and it be held accountable there. Because then you are dealing with just one entity and you can focus on it. The last point that I think is important is focused on things like economic efficiencies. Because our economy is highly inefficient. And the examples of that is even how much the length of time it takes for an SMME to get paid. If you want to improve economic activity, use payment of SMMEs because they are the people who create jobs. But the next difficult thing is that use procurement to be able to stimulate economic avenues. Why is it that a hospital, for example, in Tembisa, that might need cleaning services of linen, isn't allowing the community around Tembisa to set up laundromats so that they can clean the linen? That would be a smart way of using procurement to buy goods in the local community and ensure that actually there's economic activity, particularly in townships. This is strategic procurement. But along with that, improving on those efficiencies, not only paying off suppliers and procuring strategically, I have a genuine challenge on this issue of deviations. Now, you might be wondering, what are deviations? The way we procure goods of any state-owned enterprise, it follows the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act. Those acts instruct you to say you need to get 3 quotes. There's a whole process behind how you do that. You plan properly and you can ensure that the decision making is transparent and that we know that the best bidder was able to get the tender or get the service and provide the service. Except there's a few acts of corruption. Sometimes big business writes tenders for government departments, which already means it monopolizes the system. The second, which is more worrying for me, is that we move then to deviations, which means that we move away from all of those laws and we use what is typically called, this thing is urgent, it's an emergency, so we can't follow the usual process, we need deviations. Now, for the first quarter, for Q1, the deviations in South were over 23 billion rands. Eskom's deviations are now sitting at over 18 billion rands. Your top 5, almost people who use deviations for their own purposes, are state information, the South African National Roads Agency, the Road Accident Fund, and things like the government printing works are places where deviations happen. Now, when you interrogate, why are you deviating? Let me give you a very shocking example. When you go to government print works, they are deviating to buy paper, to buy things like envelopes. These are standard items that the government print works knows long in advance that it will need and plan for. But they simply allow on deviations, emergencies, urgency to be able to procure them so that they can pre-select who the supplier is. And ultimately, these are some of the practices that mean that not only is our economy inefficient or it's not strategic in planning, it ultimately favors a few at the expense of the many. The fight is on. Next week, I go off to Parliament's strategic planning session, and these are some of the issues we're going to raise. Because if the 6th administration was about state capture, pala, and many other issues, the 7th administration has to be about Parliament rising up to effect accountability. And as Chair of Appropriations, be sure we will be making sure that the budget represents not only the interests of the people, but it ensures that actually for every rand that gets deployed, we can ensure that it is best spent. So I look forward to catching up with you next week, and let's keep the dialogue going and let's build a South Africa that works for everybody. Thank you very much. Much love.